Nezikim. A number of years ago, and it's many years ago, I started reading, and I say reading and not learning, because I'm not. I started reading 2 Mishnahs a day. And there's a calendar that gets published every year in Israel for the Mishnah Yomit. And it was actually quite ironic because the calendar is sponsored by 2 families. One of the families was a man who I met when I came first to Israel, and I was working in a bank there that became my client. I had no idea that this was what he was doing, but it turned out that he was one of the sponsors. The other sponsor of the Mishnah Yomit was Rabbi Aaron Bat, in memory of his parents. And for those of you who know or don't know, Aaron Bat was married to one of Ima's friends from Stern. So Ayelet, so ties it all in. And I'm reading, the calendar, and I see at the top it says Aaron Bat. So I just want to. He passed away 4 years ago. So I want to give him some credit. But really, the whole inspiration for me to read my Mishnah Yomit was growing up in Norma on the very long, hot summer days when it didn't matter what was going on. Well, everybody that's been to Norma knows there wasn't anything going on. But somehow, no matter how long the Shabbat days were, it was a very big tircha. It was a burden to have to get up and sit in the living room and read, was learn. But the compromise was we didn't care what you do. You have to read it, and you can read it. You could read it in the English. You could read it in the Hebrew. Irving Bunam. You could read it in the English. You could read it in the Hebrew. As I started to grow a little bit older, I realized that somehow, like the story in the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva and the stone and the water, somehow I realized that those Shabbat afternoons reading the Mishnah, that even a hardhead like me, the water made some impression. And I realized that I was remembering things. So I figured if I start reading Mishnah, not just Avot, but the rest, and I read it enough times, maybe I'll remember something. The last Masechta in Nezikim is Horayot. And again, while I didn't learn the entire Masechta with the Gemara, I just I want to begin the Siyum with how the Gemara ends in Masechta's Horayot. There's a well-known argument in the end of Horayot, and I'll talk a little bit about what Horayot is about in a minute, as to which of 2 types of Talmidei Chachamim are preferable. So one type of Talmid Chacham is somebody who has a lot of knowledge, a breadth of knowledge, someone who's well-read, but is not very smart or doesn't have a very keen intellect. And the other type is someone who's rather brilliant but doesn't have the breadth of knowledge, which is what I'm going to use as clearly in a room where there's at least a half a dozen people who have both more intellect and are better read than I am. with their permission, I'm going to talk for a minute about what Masechta Harayot is about, and finish the last Mishnah. So keep in mind the historical period. The Romans had already conquered Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was trying to, he managed to escape. He was living in one place, he ran away to another place. And he really was trying to make sure that Torah learning was going to be continued. And the entire Masechta really deals with when the public errs, when the public does a sin because the person who was the most senior in that generation, whether it was the Kohen Gadol or whether it was the Nasi, made a mistake. And so this is really where the concept of if a tzibur relies on a psak halacha, who has the sin and what the penance, what the Kohen Gadol had to do in order to make good for the sin of the public. Luckily, it's actually a very short Masechta. There's only 3 prakim, and there's only 8 mishnayot in the third parak. And luckily, it doesn't end in Mishnah 7, because Mishnah 7 is actually, we're talking about the different levels of importance of different people and what happens if who takes priority over whom. Mishnah 7 starts talking about the man is more important than the woman is more important than the man, and in what cases. But the last Mishnah is really talking about something again which I feel is very connected to my father, and why we're here together tonight. Mishnah 8 really talks about what happens in a case where there are many poor people in need of assistance, in need of sustenance, or again, we're talking in a historical context of after the Romans sacked Yerushalayim, after the Romans conquered Eretz Yisrael, and there were many prisoners, and so the whole idea of Pidyon Shvuim was ransoming captured prisoners was important, but there's insufficient money to take care of everyone. Who comes first? And so the Mishnah begins, Kohen Kodem LeLevi, and Uncle Joe, I'm sure if my father were here, you would, with a big smile, tell him, Kohanim come first. Levi LeYisrael, Yisrael LeMamzer, Mamzer LeNatin, Natin LaGer, V'ger LeEved Mishufrar. So the different categories of who comes first, who comes second. Obviously, Kohen Levi Yisrael. After Yisrael comes a Natin comes before a Ger, and a Ger comes before an Eved Mishukrar, who then takes on mitzvot. And the Mishnah asks, Ematai, when does this order of preference occur? Bizman shekulan shavim, when all are considered equal. Aval im haya mamzer tamid chacham, v'kohen gadol am haaretz, if the mamzer was a very learned individual, and the kohen gadol, and again, in the historical context at the time, people were purchasing the kahuna, the chief kohen, the big kahuna.
That's where it came from.
if the Kohen Gadol was an unlearned man and the Mamzer was a Talmid Chacham, Az Mamzer Talmid Chacham Kodem Kohen Gadol Am Haaretz.